Hey there, By 11. We're moving quite far into the chordates now, aren't we? We're up to class Mammalia, and we've seen the diversity from fish to amphibians to reptiles to birds, and now we're looking at mammals. And when we look at mammals, we look at another endotherm, like birds, that have to consume quite a bit of food because there's a tremendous loss of energy due to heating their bodies. And that makes us pretty much committed endotherms, I'd have to say. So, what do you have to be a mammal? Well, pretty straightforward. Mammals have hair, and we'll go over just how that plays out because you'll think that there's exceptions, but there really aren't. Sweat glands. We have mammary glands. There turns out that there's three bones in our inner ear. You've probably heard of the incus, the malleus, and the stapes. Those are sometimes called hammer, anvil, and stirrup, but we'll get to that. And a fully segmented four-chambered heart. We saw that in one of the previous lectures. We looked at order Crocodilia, and one of the things that uh, that order managed to achieve was separation of systemic and pulmonary blood flow in the heart, the double pump system. So mammals took that idea and moved it forward because if you go back in time, the nearest ancestors to mammals were the reptiles, and the nearest ancestor to the birds was the reptiles. So birds and mammals are two interesting offshoots from really, you'd have to say, the Soresthian line. But let's move forward. Let's see what we've got. Okay, so we got some really neat stuff for you. On the course site, we'll have this will have all the lessons in place once we have them uh, updated. Really neat videos here, characteristics of mammals, some really good animations, in particular the mammalian heart. This respiratory system is a really good one, especially when you come down to this video here and it talks about adaptations for aquatic mammals. Make sure you check that out. They have some pretty darn interesting tricks. And then we move through some of the more interesting mammals. We have some egg layers out there known as the order Monotremata, and we're going to discuss them. And everybody thinks a platypus is such a neat little sort of harmless creature, but the males have a very sharp little spike, and that turns out to be poisonous. You want to check them out. They're definite warriors, those male platypi. And then we'll look at, as we move forward in our lessons, we're going to look at marsupials. So that's the second order of mammals. And then we'll move forward into placental mammals, really, which is the third order, where they've moved towards a fully functional and integrated placenta that help to nourish the young internally, and that's all the way through a full term. So we get our egg layers and we get our marsupials, which are pseudoplacentals. They're not really doing placenta very well, but they do it enough up to the point where we get up to things like ourselves, like humans, where we have very well formed placenta. So minimize that, and we'll get into our lesson, which I have waiting for you over here. So, interestingly enough, what did the first mammal look like? And I had alluded to this in previous lectures. From what we can find in the fossil records, we thought it would probably look like this little guy here. Oh, there we go. Just sort of a little rat like, rodent like sort of mammal. And when you think about the asteroid impact that happened 65 million years ago, endotherms had a huge advantage, able to heat their bodies, hide underground, feed on roots, nuts, just about anything that they could find. So it kind of gives you an idea of what a little guy would look like. And the skeleton, I think the skeleton's really quite important because when you look at even amphibian to reptiles and coming up to mammals now, you'll see commonality in the skeleton. You see the tail, you see the vertebrae, the ribs, space for the heart and the lungs, and you also see the pelvic region, very well formed, and the shoulder, the pectoral region, also becoming well formed as they become, well, creatures of terrestrial habit. Let's call it that. Okay, so I'll put that away. Neat little animation here I wanted to show you what makes a mammal a mammal. It's kind of kid like, but it's fun. First of all, they have to have hair at some point in their life. Okay, Now, it's obvious humans have hair, lions have hair, tigers have hair. Now, check this out. Hair on the rostrum of dolphins when they're first born. They have hair follicles, but having hair in the water would be terrible for cetaceans. That's what we call dolphins and whales and things like that. It would slow them down, and it's gone by the time they're born. So they have that characteristic. All mammals give birth to live young. There you go. Now, some mammals are egg layers, right? Our platypus is an egg layer. We get that. But the platypus, when you look at a platypus, you're sort of seeing more of the exception to the rule, I think, than the rule as you see mammals move towards burying their live internally. Mammals produce milk. And even when you look at the spiny echidna, it produces milk. Not all mammals have nipples. They have mammary glands, and you'll see with the spiny echidna that they actually release the milk onto their spines, and the babies just lick it off. Warm blooded, maintaining a constant body temperature. Well, check it out. We're not all the same. So humans are around 97 degrees. And when you look at giraffes, for example, pretty, they could go up to 104. That'd be considered a fever for us. But the point is, they maintain a homeostatic level, a constant body temperature. That is, unless you get a fever. All mammals have lungs, they're air breathers. It's what we do. And you can have a little bit of fun of this. This is on the website. See if you can figure out the mammal box. I think you guys will be good to go. Now, we'll come back here. We'll come back to the mammalian heart. There's a few things I want to get out of the way first, and then we'll come back and talk about that double pump because it's much more sophisticated than we see in some of our closer relatives. About the time you get to the crocodiles, you pretty well get a similar looking heart, but not till then. So, okay, here we go. First section, introduction to the mammals. We've spoken to a lot of this, so we can go through it. There's the characteristics. If you want to break it down to the absolute simplest elements, you could say hair, mammary glands, right? And having warm bodies. I mean, that would be the root three. And these little guys down here in the water, if you don't know what those are manatees. We've got a little chimpanzee and a cheetah and gorilla over there in the corner. I think the cheetah's looking at you, have you for lunch. Now we can expand on our definitions. Our primary definitions obviously are, there we go, hair and milk and keeping the bodies warm. Okay, being endotherms. Four-chambered hearts, pretty well goes without saying. Air breathers, here you go. So if you were ever grilled or quizzed on this, what you would want to be able to do is to name all those things. The hair, milk, air breathing, four-chambered hearts, and keeping the bodies warm. There you go. So there are 5 characteristics hiding out in there. But when you think about what a mammal is, if you see 5 points that you should come up with, I think you could easily come up with those 5. Now, the origin, mammals didn't just suddenly show up at the asteroid impact. In fact, they had been evolving and coming along. We're looking at a thecodont, and you can see it. What we're seeing is probably the ancestor, at least it's the best hypothesis we have, to not only the dinosaurs but what rose to be the mammals. If you think of sort of the first mammals, what was coming along? Probably the invention of regulating body temperature that started to come online. The ability to where you're not just having a watertight body, but you're also looking to produce hair, perhaps as a way to maintain a constant body temperature. These are just mutations that were happening to the reptile line. So what we think is that they're just this little rodent-like furry little reptiles started cruising around, and that they started to change over time. We found their skeletons, and we can tell. Actually, there's a trick for looking at actually the bone in cross section to determine whether or not an animal heats its own body or not. And as nearest as we can figure, looking at that cross section, these little guys actually did that. So pretty neat. Also, when you evolve, well, as you look at the mammalian skulls moving forward, there's not so many fine little bones. In fact, one thing that's very hard to find, especially uh, with snake skeletons, sure you'll find the vertebrae and you'll find the ribs, but the head has so many bones that it falls apart. And it's really hard to find all the little parts. It's fairly fragile. Now, with mammal skulls, we see a lot of fusion of bones, and they sort of come together, and it's reduced. It's a little bit simpler. So the structure lasts much better, especially in the process of fossilization. Now, let's zoom in on the middle ear. Here you could see when sound arrives to, say, a reptilian ear bone, there's the eardrum membrane, and then you can see kind of one bone, right? The stapes, and that's all that there is really to transmit the sound. Whereas mammals evolved a pretty interesting mechanism. The sound waves come in, and this is sometimes called the hammer, anvil, and stirrup, malleus, incus, and stapes. If you like hammer, anvil, and stirrup, I'm fine with that. This bone vibrates in tune with the sound. It's connected to a second bone, the incus, and the last one, which is called the stirrup sometimes because of its shape, the stapes, it vibrates as well and against the membrane, and it transmits the pulses into the inner ear to where this snail-shaped thing, the cochlea, is, and it just relays the sound in a way that we can detect, and to quite a sensitive extent, auditory response or auditory data, if you will. So as we moved forward, when you look at teeth, jaws, dentition, it wasn't just about eating insects and it wasn't just about consuming plant material. In fact, there was a whole variety of things that the mammalian jaw was going to be able to do. So, really strong jaws for lots of different types of chewing, from seeds to roots, all manner of things. And we see that in this powerful shaped lower jaw right here. And with jaw muscles going all the way up onto the top of the head for providing a very strong bite. And if you ever look at your dog or your cat, you'll see that where they have a ridge at the top of their head, and it's what the muscles actually attach to. Um, in their version of the mammalian skull, that gives them about 1,000 pound per square inch bite. Well, at least dogs. Mine's sleeping in the chair beside me here, noticing I'm talking about him. Variations of the mammalian skull, of course, come into play. The carnivores with the sharp, tearing teeth and those canines, right? Dog like canines. But I mean, cats have them, so we shouldn't just say they're dog like. With herbivores with the molars and the premolars, which in this case are adapted for grinding, and a hinge joint which goes very, very high and gives the herbivore the ability to chew and grind their food. Now we get to the mammalian heart. Now, this we study in a lot of detail in Biology 12. Really, what it is go like this. It's a double pump system where right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. And it's backwards because you're staring at it as if it's in someone's chest. I know that always throws people for a loop. Just remember, when you're looking at a diagram, everything's reversed. Now let's pop out of this for just a moment and talk about the structure of the heart. So it's like a little mini Biology 12 lesson. But what needs to happen is the right side of the heart needs to send blood to the lungs, and I've talked about this before. And it's interesting because when you send blood away, you actually send blood through a vein. Now, or rather, sorry, when you send blood away from the heart, you're sending it through arteries, and when it's returning to the heart, it's coming back in veins. So veins lead to the heart, arteries lead away. Now, everybody thinks that arteries have to be carrying oxygenated blood. The exception to that is in the pulmonary system. So this is where it can get a little complicated, but we'll just break it down. The only the only artery in the body that carries deoxygenated blood is the pulmonary artery because it's headed to the lungs for a recharge. And the only vein that carries oxygenated blood back to the heart, the reverse of what you would expect, is the pulmonary vein. I'm just going to cue up a little animation here. Okay. So the mammalian heart, sorry folks, is basically set up in a right-left system. The right side is meant to recharge, and the left side is meant to send the yummy good blood out to the body uh, to carry oxygen and to exchange dissolved materials, food, etc. Now, in the mammalian heart, we'll just pause there. There's all sorts of cool detail here. It's very well divided here, and you see that in the crocodiles as well. And this is the aorta, okay? And what you'll see here, some of these vessels lead upwards up to the head and neck, whereas other vessels, the aorta will descend. The descending aorta will come down to the body and lead in all directions down there, take oxygen to the lower half of the body. What you're seeing with this yellow illumination here is the electrical system of the heart, which we don't really need to get into right now. But suffice it to say, we have a very advanced heart. And when you think about what this heart can do, this heart can pump at phenomenal rates. When you look at a cheetah achieving 110 to 120 kilometers an hour, this pump can sustain the action of the body to make that happen. It's absolutely fabulous. Another thing we want to look at is our respiratory system. Now, it's pretty amazing. Our respiratory system is, I would actually say birds have outdone us on this, but ours is still pretty good. We have an issue with breathing recycled air because when we inhale, there's still a little bit of recycled air used, tired air, if you will, in our lungs. And when we exhale, we can't really get rid of it all. Whereas birds have a one-way, highly efficient respiratory system flow. We're kind of a congested highway, cars all over on the same road. But when we breathe, move past some of the details here. When we breathe, our lungs, in order to fill, the diaphragm at the bottom moves down. Let's see if we can get it there. It's not my favorite animation. The diaphragm moves down, and the lungs fill. And it's really what happens is when our diaphragm, that muscle contracts, it pulls air in, and our lungs expand. And then when the diaphragm relaxes like this, it pushes the air back out. So that's interesting. Our ribs, if you ever put your hands on your ribs move up and out because the lungs need additional space. If you've ever pulled a muscle here, in between your ribs here, these intercostal muscles, you will feel it all day long because it's just an incredible nagging pain because every time you breathe, they have to contract to expand your thoracic region to allow your lungs to have enough room. So there you go. Sorry, that animation didn't work out as well as I wanted it to. Okay. So we're going to get back to our introductory lesson material. As I said, with mammals, there is a lot to talk about. So let's turn reflection back on. Okay, and we're back. So pretty neat system, that circulatory system of ours. In addition to that, our lungs. In fact, most of our body systems are incredibly advanced. Mammals, we're not as efficient in our excretory systems. Before I move on to the nervous system, I want to point this out. We don't produce this hyper-concentrated urine. We're not quite as effective as our avian relatives and as our reptilian relatives in that regard. But we're adapted quite well to what we do. We don't have to conserve water as much as they do, so we don't. right? But there are some pretty interesting tricks when you look at camels storing all that water as fat in their humps. It's metabolic water. Let's be clear about this. And the camel can metabolize fat to produce water for itself. So pretty interesting. Looking at the nervous system, we've got quite an amazing brain. Hopefully we put it to good use, right? We've got olfactory bulbs up here, and that helps us to process senses of smell, things like that. Your cerebrum, this interesting tangled looking mass of white and gray matter here, um, pretty much uh, controls your higher thinking, your spatial perception, and it's divided up into several lobes. Interestingly enough, one of the lobes, which is being shown here, which is very involved in your visual abilities, it interprets vision, so we'll have a little fun with this here, is your occipital lobe. Now, in grade 12, I go into this in much greater detail, but for now, we'll just cover the basics. Your cerebellum is all about balance, right? And some large, let's see, that won't highlight. It doesn't see it as words. Your cerebellum, right here, is something that predators will try to bite into. In fact, when you look at big cats, when they seize their prey, if they can, they'll bite into the back of the neck. Your household cat, if it's uh, I'll just have to pause here, folks. I have a call. I'll be right back. Well, folks, inevitably that can happen. You'll be right in the middle of something and the phone rings. But that's okay. I've taken care of it and we're back. So I was mentioning about the cerebellum, your balance center that big cats, when they hunt their prey, will bite into something like that. Because if you take out the cerebellum at the back there, you lose all control of your muscles. In addition to that, just below that cerebellum, you have your breathing and respiration centers in the medulla oblongata. So if that, oops, if that itself is bitten into, that's it. It's game over. The lungs, the circulatory system, everything shuts down and you're dead. South of that, you have your spinal cord, which relays information from the mammalian brain to all the regions of the body. Think of it as your fiber optic cable that carries all the information throughout your network. Okay? The limbs and digits of mammalian critters are adapted to several different ways of life. And if you look at uh, the two bones in the arm, you've got the radius, that's the bone that's in line with your thumb, and on the other side of the ulna. And in each of these cases, it's kind of neat because what you'll see is sometimes they're separate and sometimes they're fused, as in the case of a horse, which makes sense because it's under so much pressure the way they've adapted. And these are homologous. That means that they're similar in structure, but they've been adapted to slightly different modes. You can see in a mole, a little bit separate here. In a bat, light, very light, but fused. In a seal, this starts to look a heck of a lot like a human arm right here. Look at the seal, and look at the digits here, the 5 digits, and then the monkey, for example, right, where you're seeing the thumb right here. And this is all encased here, obviously, in the flipper. The bat has the wing tissue around the outside, and you've got the mole and the horse. And I love it when messages show up in the middle of my show, but that's okay, not a big deal, because we are at the end of chapter 32, section 1. Okay, homologous structures are really cool, by the way, because what they teach us is that there's a common ancestry to the bones in our arms. They're just adapted for either flight or burrowing, or as with a seal, helping it cruise through the water, the monkey climbing, horse running. You get the idea. Okay, folks, that's Mr. Bleecker, and chapter 32, section 1, the mammals, is complete. Have a good one, and we'll see you later.